As we're talking about the conference, we know that hundreds of business leaders are here talking about the future of Michigan. And joining me right now is Doug Rothwell. He is the president and CEO of Business Leaders for Michigan. Doug, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, you bet. Good morning.
Well, you know, this has been an interesting, energetic conference so far. But let me ask you, as someone who is with the business leaders, how are we viewed? How is Michigan viewed as a whole in terms of surging for business?
Well, I think it's improving. I mean, we were a state that went through, the lost decade, that we call it, where we lost, about 1 million jobs of the 2 million jobs that were lost in America. We had a rough time, but I think the resurgence that's happened in the last couple of years due to a lot of great leadership here in Lansing to get our fiscal house in order, and also what's going on in Detroit is really turning the corner of how Michigan is viewed.
Could it also be that maybe businesses are staying away, waiting to see what happens with the city of Detroit?
I think that was the case maybe a few years ago, but I think you're now starting to see businesses think that it's safe to dive in. And the governor, I think, describes it very well, which is business likes to have certainty, and they didn't know where bottom was before. Well, now bottom, in terms of how much worse can things get, is becoming certain with an emergency manager in place and getting our arms around the fiscal situation. And I think people like Dan Gilbert see that and say, look, this is a good buy right now. There's more upside than downside, and I think other people are following his lead.
It's funny because someone said to me yesterday, you don't get a Dan Gilbert very often. I mean, once in a 20, 30-year cycle do you have someone that's coming around and infusing that kind of capital into a city like this. Is he bringing other people along?
Well, no question. I mean, he's in some cases, dragging them along. I mean, he's almost single-handedly, I think, the force for change in Detroit, but a lot of people are also looking what he's doing and saying, look, I want to be part of that. I mean, look, Detroit is an iconic American city, and I think people like to see comeback stories. And so if you can be part of writing that story, I think there's a lot of businesses that are going to join in.
So Doug, talk to me a little bit about how business leaders from Michigan are talking about education and then the connection for the need for education in Michigan and getting these jobs filled with kids that are educated for them.
Well, I mean, look, having the right talent is going to be absolutely critical to our ability to continue to grow as a state. And when I mean talent, it's not just people that have four-year degrees, but also people with skilled trades backgrounds and constantly upgrading your skills as careers keep changing.
What's the gap that we have right now?
Well, it's hard to say, but people say there's anywhere between 50 to 70,000 jobs that can't be filled in Michigan because we don't have the right match of people with the right skills to fill those jobs.
So how do you go about, who are you talking to right now to try to, I guess, change the wheel, which is not very easy to do?
Well, what we've done is a lot of research to find out exactly what the problem is. And what I'd say two things about it. One is that we have a short-term skills shortage that we just talked about, these 50 to 70,000 jobs, but that's going to be replaced in not so distant future by an education shortage. We're just not turning out enough people with an education beyond high school because jobs increasingly are requiring that level of education to function. The other thing we're finding is that while STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math is very much in demand, about half the jobs in demand don't require STEM. Management backgrounds, human resources, communication skills. What that tells us is we've got to get more educated workers through the process coming out of high school and then going into community colleges and universities.
What are some of the good conversations that you're having up here on Mackinac about that?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of agreement that this is what we need to do as a state, is to get a more educated workforce in both skills and critical thinking skills.
Is it great to finally see that at the top of the agenda?
It is, and again, I think part of it's because we're a state that you could get a good job not so long ago with just a high school degree. And I think we're changing now the attitudes of the public that recognize that this needs to be done.
So when we leave the island on Friday, what do you hope to take with you?
Well, I hope that this consensus that's building up here can really carry through back when we go home. So, let's take another example. One of the things that there's been some resistance to is the adoption of what's called the Common Core Standards, which is basically setting out what the expectations are of what you should learn when you graduate from high school.
And the education budget just came out yesterday with the governor, and that was not included.
It was not included in there, and so I hope that the conversation up here about how important it is for our kids to have the critical thinking that they need when they leave high school to be able to either go into college or to go out into a career, that's vital, and we need to make sure that that kind of a situation is reversed in the budget.
Jeb Bush talked about that yesterday in his keynote speech. I mean, how do you then go back and go back to legislators and say, no, 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 you have to look at this again? What kind of process is that?
Well, I think a lot of it's education and awareness. I mean, that's why these conferences are so important, because it exposes people to different points of view. I mean, I respect the fact that people have concerns about what any kind of a standard could mean in terms of changing the way their kids are educated. I get that. But at the same time, I think what we're concerned about as business leaders are that the game is being, changing so much for what kids need to learn to compete in the world today, that if we don't have them meet at least minimum standards, we're going to have our kids at a disadvantage, and that's not good for any of us.
No, and we have to be ready. Thank you so much for joining me. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much.